this video, we will be using Autopano to stitch together images from a GoPro Omni array into 360-degree panoramas. Using these panoramas to create virtual tours will be covered in a subsequent video linked in the description. After launching Autopano Giga, the first thing we will need to do is bring in images. So you can either drag over the 6 images from the GoPro Omni array, or you can load them in with a open images. Once you have some images in, just hit detect for the group. It will automatically find different points in the photos to overlap, and will create a basic stitching of those images that we can later work with. Another way to bring in images is with the Browse folder. You can point it to a specific folder that contains all of your images or images broken into subfolders. And we want it to automatically detect. Here I have configured it to require 6 images to make a pano, with an average of 6 because the GoPro Omni array has 6 cameras. And this is just to help make it more efficient, guarantee that it finds all the right images. And so it's going to go through and it's going to identify automatically all the groups of photos, and then automatically create a base pano to work off of from those groupings. Once the automated stitching is complete, we will need to do a little editing of the panoramas. As you can see, many of these automated images are not aligned to the point of view you would expect. We want to make sure that the stitch panoramas are not only as seamless as possible, but also level and default to the desired direction and point of view. To do this, we click Edit, and pardon me while I resize this window. There we are. All right, so a few things to note. Over here on the left-hand side, this stitching quality, the global RMS, the default is usually really good. If you see the little green flag and you have a value under 4, honestly, you usually have to do nothing to adjust the stitching of it. Another thing to note is in the very center of this image here, the big horizontal and vertical midpoint, that crosshair, that is your default viewpoint. That's where whatever's centered there is what someone's going to be looking at right away when this panoramic image first loads up into any kind of software. And all those other grid lines are there to kind of help you identify planes so that you can level the image, because it will definitely be distorted in certain edges, but certain places where there's horizontal lines, it will be useful to be able to have something that you know is level to compare to as you're leveling this image out. And then along the very bottom down there, you can expand that, but that's all the specific images that are part of the panorama. To view each one of those images inside of the panorama, go up to the top and click Images mode, and then you can hover over each one of the individual images to see specifically how it is warped and overlaps within the entire panorama. The next thing that we're going to do is actually shift around all these images to orient the panoramic view the way we want. So to do that, we'll have to identify a stable point and base everything else kind of off of those points. In this case, I will look at the tripod that is the very bottom of the image. So we'll have to go up to the top, click Move Images, and then come down, and then we can click and drag um, the overall image. Again, basing on that tripod is the bottom, so I'm going to get that down and smoosh that to the bottom. And then this is where you can look at all those horizontal and vertical lines in the actual image, the brick patterns, the bookshelf, those partition walls. And by looking at those vertical and horizontal lines, I can get the overall image mostly oriented so that it's like a proper view. You'll want to ignore the outer fringes, the very, very top and the very bottom. You will absolutely get distortion the closer things are to the lens or the outside edges of your image. So don't worry too much about that. It is important to note, though, that the very center horizontal line should be flat. Anything that should be straight um, at the very center along that horizontal midpoint should look flat. So a bookshelf or a straight line or a shelf, fireplace mantle, all these types of things that should be completely flat. If they are at that center line, they should look flat. Once they get the farther above or below that line they are, the more they'll get a curvature, and that's okay. But if you want the overall image to look good, anything that is along the very center horizontally should pretty well match up to a flat line. One other setting that is sometimes useful is blend. Blending is how the application takes the different images and figures out the overlap between them to blend the edges, the overlap of the two corresponding images to create the composite whole. So if you're not happy with the overall output of a panorama, you can come back in, use blend, and then just try different settings. Within that and see if the output, then if there's a straight line that looks kind of jagged at the overlap point, you can try a couple different settings and see if you can get that to smooth out a little different using different settings. Once you've edited the panorama and you feel it's ready to output, you come up to the top and we're going to click render. Looks like a little gear. And it's going to bring up all of our rendering options. So our overall height and width, interpolation technologies, and as with the blending, all of these different settings, if you aren't happy with the overall output, you can come in and you can mess with these. But generally speaking, the defaults are going to be the best. You can also change your file types if you know that what you're going to be working with will need PNG, TIFF, various other formats. Unless you're printing these, DPI of 72 is going to be just fine. So once you have all of those settings, your output location, you just click render. And then it's going to take all those settings that you've put into it, the warping, the adjustment to the default view, all those things are going to get composited into an output file. So far, we've looked at how to edit an individual pano and render it. But if you're doing a larger project or a tour, you will likely have multiple panoramic images that you will need to edit and then render. To save time, luckily, Autopano has a batch rendering process. To do this, you'll still come in and you will edit a pano as normal. But instead of rendering right away, once you have all of your panos, you know, edited the way you want, go in on each one as you finish them, and you're going to save that pano. Once you have saved all your panoramas, come back out to the main screen, click the batch renderer, And in this window, you'll click Add Project. And then select all of the panos that you want to render as a batch. It will use the same settings across all of them. And with them all in this batch rendering window, then you just simply click the Start Batch button that looks like a little green play button, and it will process and render all of your panoramic images. Although Autopano has many other advanced editing features for fine-tuning your panoramic images, we hope that this video will cover the basics of generating images with the default settings. If you have further questions, please reach out to our systems librarian by email or using the contact form on the library website.